Have you ever gazed at an old map, its edges curling, the ink faded into soft shadows of time, and noticed a name, quiet but vast, stretching across the paper as though it once held half the world? A name you never heard in school, never read in the history books. Yet it lingers there like a whisper. That name is Tartaria. For centuries, the word floated across maps, journals, and whispered tales of merchants. Explorers described its horizons, missionaries wrote of its people, and travelers carried back stories of endless lands. And yet today the name has vanished like mist melting into the dawn. Not conquered, not absorbed, simply erased. How does a civilization disappear without a trace? How can something that once seemed so immense, so undeniable, simply fade into silence tonight? Let us drift together into that silence. Imagine you are walking down a quiet street in St. Petersburg. The cobblestones are damp with rain, the air cool against your skin. Around you rise buildings older than memory, their facades calm, their windows watching. And then you notice something. Rows of windows, not at eye level but sunken beneath the earth. Arches carved long ago, doors that now open only into soil. Why would anyone design windows for the underground? Now let that image carry you further, across oceans and continents. In Warsaw, in Vienna, in Boston, in San Francisco, even in faraway Melbourne, the same strange sight appears. Half-buried windows, doors sealed into earth, silent reminders repeating in every city. Is it only coincidence, or is it the soft echo of something forgotten? Perhaps these are the shadows of Tartaria, a civilization not lost by time alone, but buried beneath mud, beneath silence, beneath the careful turning of pages that never mention its name again. Tartaria was no small land. On maps from centuries past, it sprawled across Asia's northern crown from the Caspian Sea to the frozen edges of Siberia, from the Himalayas to the Arctic winds. Sometimes called Great Tartary, sometimes divided into regions, Muscovite, Chinese, independent, but always there, always vast. And then, one day, it was gone. By the 19th century, the name had slipped away. By the 20th, it was remembered only in whispers. So who decided it should vanish? Civilizations fall all the time, Rome, Maya, Sumer, but their ruins endure. Their names echo. Tartaria is different, not fallen, but forbidden. Close your eyes and picture an old map, the kind drawn by candlelight, filled with seas that ripple like watercolor, mountains drawn like sleeping giants. In the far northeast, you'll see strange drawings. Horsemen with bows, walled cities, domes that glisten like suns. Turn the pages of Marco Polo's journals, or Persian chronicles, or Arab geographies, and you'll find descriptions of vast markets, fortresses, domed halls, and warriors who rode like storms across the land. And yet, history today tells us these were only nomads, tribes without permanence, without architecture, without the weight of civilization. Can both stories be true? Or has something been gently hidden away? Even in the quiet of archives, the unease lingers. Photographs from the late 1800s reveal workers uncovering what look like entire streets, floors, and windows, buried beneath the ground. Ornate arches once touched by light, now sealed in shadow. The common explanation is slow accumulation, layers of soil, of debris, of time. But look more closely. These buried floors appear across continents at nearly the same depth, aligned as though touched by one single event. Some whisper of a great flood of mud that sometime in the 18th or 19th century, a tide of earth swept silently across the world, swallowing cities whole, and in its silence, Tartaria was lost. If true, this is not only the loss of a civilization, it is the loss of memory itself. And here, dear listener, is where our journey begins, not with fear but with curiosity, not with panic but with wonder. Once you hear the name Tartaria, it lingers. Once you notice the buried windows, the domes, the spires, you cannot unsee them. They whisper softly, asking not to be believed at once, but to be remembered gently in dreams. So tonight I invite you to drift with me. Let the maps unfold. Let the stones speak. Let the silence carry you into a story the world has tried to forget. Because Tartaria waits in the quiet. And sometimes the quiet is where truth hides best. History, as we often hear it, begins with fragments. A carved inscription on stone, a faded line in a manuscript, a traveler's words carried like whispers from one campfire to another. And Tartaria, too, begins this way, not as a great empire loudly proclaimed, but as a hush in the background of history, Long before its name stretched across the maps of Europe, Tartaria lived only in shadows, in hints scattered across the chronicles of China, the verses of Persian scholars, the notes of Arab geographers, and the sermons of medieval monks. It was never introduced with certainty, always implied, never explained, and perhaps that is why it feels so mysterious even now. Centuries ago in China, dynasties recorded neighbors that lived beyond their northern horizons. The Tang and Song spoke of tribes moving with the seasons, horsemen who seemed almost one with the wind. They hunted, they rode, they vanished into the snow and grass. The winters there were long and harsh, the ground locked in ice. And yet from those same lands came treasures, furs so soft they rivaled silk, minerals pulled from mountains of stone and frost, horses strong enough to cross a continent without breaking. The Chinese never wrote the word Tartaria. Instead, they spoke of Tatars, shadows moving in the far distance. But the details aligned the endless steppe, the winters that stretched like eternities, the wealth hidden in a land no one fully claimed. Were they recording neighbors, or were they glimpsing the first outlines of something larger, something the world would later call Tartaria further west? The Persian and Arab chroniclers of the 12th and 13th centuries also left their notes. They spoke of fierce riders bound together by loyalty and discipline, traders as well as warriors, moving with astonishing speed across rivers and plains. The geographer Al-Idrisi described rivers flowing farther than sight, caravans winding across the land like living rivers themselves. Armies could appear where no one expected them, disciplined, precise, then vanish again into the horizon. Here too, the name Tatar begins to appear close enough that in time, it would become Tartaria. It is striking that so many different cultures separated by mountains, deserts, and languages converged on the same vision. They could not all have invented the same mirage. Something must have been there. And in Europe, Tartaria first arrived not as fact but as myth. Monks copying manuscripts in dim cloisters wrote of lands at the very edge of the world, where the familiar ended and God's mysteries began. They tied the Tatars to ancient prophecies, Gog and Magog, nations locked behind walls of iron, destined one day to break free. On medieval maps, Tartaria was drawn not as territory but as imagination, a vast blank whiteness, dotted with horsemen carrying bows, with cities ringed by strange walls, with towers unlike anything in Christendom. These drawings were not science. They were fear given shape. Yet behind the fear, the same patterns appeared again. Endless land, mounted warriors, the presence of cities. A paradox that whispered through every tale: savages who nonetheless built, raiders who somehow organized, wanderers who left the impression of empire. And then came the 13th century, and the silence gave way to thunder. The armies of Genghis Khan swept across Eurasia like a storm. Cities fell, kingdoms dissolved, Europe trembled. Suddenly the vague shadows became living terror. And yet, even in their fear, chroniclers noted something strange. Roads laid across vast distances, stations for messengers, discipline more exact than any army of the West. Unable to tell Mongols from Tatars, Europeans called them all by one name, Tartars. Some even added an extra R, turning it into Tartarus, the abyss of Greek myth. That single letter transformed them from men into nightmares, creatures of punishment, children of hell. But amid the terror, order remained visible. Roads, couriers, settlements, trade, structures that suggested a civilization deeper than raiding, larger than tribes, perhaps even the faint outlines of Tartaria itself. By the 14th century, the word Tartaria finally began appearing on maps. No longer just a people, but a land, vast, immense, covering half of Asia. The lines were imperfect, the details often blurred, but the name was there. And once written, it could not easily be forgotten. When I think of these beginnings, I picture it as a whisper across centuries. Chinese scribes noting shadows to the north, Arab geographers mapping rivers that seemed to have no end, monks sketching demons beyond the horizon. Each voice separate yet strangely harmonious, and in their harmony a shape appears. A shape we now call Tartaria. But already, even at its beginning, it carried the seed of its mystery. Not fully seen, never clearly defined, half imagined, half remembered. Like something glimpsed at the corner of your vision, gone when you turn your head. And perhaps that is why Tartaria has lingered in whispers all this time. Because what is never fully named is never fully gone. Maps are not only tools, They are like mirrors of imagination, like whispers preserved in ink. They tell us not just where the rivers flow or the mountains rise, but what people once believed about the world. And for centuries, one word drifted across those maps again and again: Tartaria. At first, it was not a nation with clear borders. It was more like a cloud of ink shading the farthest edges of parchment, a soft label drawn across the northern lands where certainty faded into mystery. Cartographers filled the blank spaces with gentle stroke sketches of horsemen, of domes, of fortresses that no one in Europe had ever truly seen. The Catalan Atlas of 1375, one of the treasures of medieval mapping, painted Tartaria not as a small province, but as a kingdom stretching across the top of Asia. The riders are shown in bright colors, bows ready in their hands, their faces turned toward the west as though gazing beyond the edge of the page. Why would the mapmakers write such a name so boldly? If it was only rumor, why let it linger if it had no weight? Then came the stories. Marco Polo, in his long wanderings, wrote of cities that seemed endless, of markets alive with merchants from many lands, of fortresses rising from the steppe like islands in a sea of grass. He described landscapes where one could ride for days and never reach the horizon. Rivers so wide they seemed to split the earth itself. Though he never used the word Tartaria as we know it, his words gave cartographers what they craved: detail, and from his pages they began to draw the outline more confidently. By the 14th and 15th centuries, Tartaria appeared again and again on maps, not as a blank expanse, but filled with names of cities: Samarkand, Bukhara, Karakorum like a star added to a constellation. For Europeans, it was no longer only fear of distant horsemen. It was a recognition that something vast and organized lay beyond. In the Renaissance, when curiosity deepened, maps became works of art as well as guides. Abraham Ortelius, Gerardus Mercator, and others gave Tartaria shape and weight. They divided it into Great Tartary, Muscovite Tartary, Chinese Tartary, as though slicing a shadow to better understand it. And yet in every division the name remained enormous, always sprawling, always undeniable. To look at those maps today is to feel a kind of dream. A land larger than Russia, larger than China, painted across Asia as if it were a giant sleeping just beyond Europe's reach. And the images that accompanied it were never plain. Domes rising like lanterns against the sky, mounted riders moving forever in eternal gallop, strange cities enclosed by walls, their towers unlike anything in the West. These were not decorations. They were stories softly embedded in ink. They whispered of a world both familiar and strange, rich with trade, powerful in war, mysterious in origin. Imagine a room lit by candlelight, a map unrolled across a table. A king, a merchant, or a sailor leaning close, tracing the edges with a finger. And there it is, the vast sweep of Tartaria written in dark ink across the north. A name so large it feels heavy. A name that seems to say, here lies a force too great to ignore. For hundreds of years, Tartaria was treated as fact. Its presence on maps became as natural as the oceans or mountains. And then suddenly, it was gone. By the 19th century, the name shrank. By the 20th, it vanished completely. No debates, no explanations, simply silence. To erase a name from maps is no small thing. Maps are stubborn. They last longer than kings, longer than treaties. For Tartaria to vanish, someone had to choose to let the ink fade. Someone had to decide that the word no longer belonged. And perhaps that is the heart of the mystery. Because what is drawn on a map becomes real in memory, and what is erased from a map can vanish from memory too. So as you rest, imagine those old maps, parchment breathing in candlelight. Imagine a name so vast it seemed eternal. And imagine the quiet moment when the cartographers laid down their pens and the ink of Tartaria was never drawn again. A civilization, perhaps, gently erased by silence. Every civilization leaves behind its stones. Greece had its marble temples, Rome its aqueducts, Egypt its pyramids rising from the sand. And if Tartaria truly existed, then surely it too left monuments. And perhaps it did. All across the world, in cities near and far, there are buildings that seem to belong not quite to the place where they stand. Their lines are too perfect, their proportions too balanced, their presence too quiet and yet too strong. Walk past them and you may not notice it first, but pause, and you will feel it. The most haunting feature is the dome, not the gentle curve of Roman tradition, but domes shaped like onions or flames, swelling toward the sky as if they were reaching for something unseen. You can find them in Moscow, in Kazan, in St. Petersburg. but also, curiously, in Warsaw, in Istanbul, even in San Francisco and Melbourne. Why should the same shape, the same proportion, echo across continents so far apart? Beside these domes rise slender spires. They climb high into the air, often tipped with metal, sometimes sharp like a needle, sometimes ending in a delicate ornament that glints in the sun. Historians call them decorative. Engineers call them lightning rods. Yet they appear again and again across oceans, across centuries. Always the same. Step inside and the sense deepens. The halls are vast, their ceilings impossibly high, their windows casting soft light like water falling through glass. The proportions are precisely so precise they seem to echo mathematical harmonies, golden ratios, sacred geometries. It is as though the builders were not only shaping space but tuning it like an instrument. And then the mysteries hidden within. Some of these buildings have floors warmed by unseen systems, channels beneath the stone that carried heat gently through every room. Others have air ducts that circulate warmth in winter, coolness in summer. In some, water systems lie beneath the walls and floors. Not crude wells, but carefully laid pipes and reservoirs, as though the buildings themselves were alive, breathing, drinking, pulsing with hidden life. It feels less like architecture and more like design, not just beauty, but function. And what if the domes and spires were not merely ornaments? Some whisper they were collectors drawing energy from the sky, pulling power from the air itself, like forgotten machines resting in plain sight. The thought is delicate, almost dreamlike, that these cathedrals, these halls, these towers were once part of a network, humming with energy the way our cities hum with electricity today, but now they stand silent. Or perhaps only sleeping. Another detail whispers from their stones, the windows buried beneath the ground, the doors that now open only into earth, as though the buildings once stood taller, only to be gently swallowed by the soil. We see them as basements, but what if those floors were once the true ground level, now hidden under time or perhaps under something sudden and silent? And yet, even in silence, their beauty endures. The domes shimmer, the spires still point skyward, the arches still invite us in. They are not ruins, not broken. They stand as though waiting for us to notice, to remember. When I walk past such a building, I feel a stillness, almost like being in a dream. My footsteps echo softly, and I think, this is more than stone. This is memory. This is something that was meant to last. Perhaps Tartaria left no written chronicles, no carved tablets, no triumphant proclamations. Perhaps its truest voice is in these buildings, quiet, enduring, repeating the same shapes across the world as if whispering the same story again and again. And maybe, if you listen closely, those domes, those spires, those hidden floors will speak to you. Not with words, but with presence, with the feeling that you are standing not only in a city of today, but in the echo of something older, something vast, something the world tried to forget. Stone does not lie, and perhaps in stone Tartaria still waits. Some mysteries are carved in stone, others are buried beneath it. As you walk through the old quarters of St. Petersburg, the city feels serene, ornate facades, broad boulevards, quiet courtyards where the air seems heavy with memory. But look closer and you will notice something unusual. Rows of windows set at the level of your ankles, sometimes even lower, sealed behind bricks, opening into nothing but earth. At first, they seem harmless, perhaps only strange choices of design. But then, when you look again, you begin to see the same thing in Warsaw, in Vienna, in Prague, across the ocean in Boston and San Francisco, even in Melbourne on the far side of the world. Half-buried windows, sealed arches, doorways that once must have opened to the light, now sunken into the quiet soil. Could all of this be coincidence? Or are we looking at the trace of something that once swept across continents? Old photographs, taken in the late 1800s and early 1900s, show workers uncovering what appear to be entire lower levels, rooms with plastered walls, doorways carefully framed, windows meant for daylight, floors that had once been lived in, now trapped beneath the streets. The simple explanation is gradual change. Cities rise layer by layer through centuries of rebuilding. Soil builds up, debris collects, and slowly the streets climb higher. And yes, this happens in places, but look again. Notice how in city after city the depth is almost the same. The lower levels buried at nearly the same height. The windows sunken with uncanny consistency. This is not the slow, uneven work of centuries. This feels different, as if at some point the ground simply rose, swallowing the world's streets in silence. This is the whisper of the mud flood. Some imagine it as a tide of earth, moving not like stone, but like water. A flow of mud sweeping suddenly through cities, quiet and unstoppable, filling doorways, pressing against windows, drowning the first floors of buildings across the world. If such an event happened, it would explain so much. The buried windows, the sunken doors, the strange sensation that many of our cities are built not on new ground but on top of something older, something hidden. And yet, there are no chronicles of it. No great records of disaster, no diaries describing the day the earth itself seemed to rise. Only silence. Perhaps that silence is the loudest clue of all. Imagine walking down into one of these basements. The air cool, the stone damp. You run your hand along a wall and you find an arch perfectly carved leading nowhere. A window set into the earth, framed with care but opening only to darkness. It feels less like a basement and more like a memory. What could have caused such a flood of earth? Some suggest earthquakes, sudden landslides, volcanic eruptions far away whose echoes spread. Others imagine melting ice, torrents of water and soil rushing from mountains. And some whisper of stranger causes, forces not natural at all, perhaps even deliberate. But whatever the cause, the effect remains. Whole levels of cities hidden beneath our feet, and with them perhaps the traces of something we are no longer meant to see. If Tartaria truly existed, the mud flood would explain its vanishing act with a quiet efficiency. A civilization could be drowned not in water, but in earth. Its architecture silenced, its technologies entombed. Survivors could rebuild upon the ruins, leaving only faint hints, windows bricked over, doors that now lead to nothing. When I think of the mud flood, I do not picture chaos. I picture silence. A city waking one morning to find its streets changed, its doors half buried, its windows sealed by earth. And then slowly, life continuing. New roads laid, new stories told, the old ones fading into the ground beneath. Perhaps that is why we find no records. Because the survivors chose not to speak of it, or because someone else chose for them. And so the buildings whisper softly, if you pause long enough to listen. Their bricked windows, their hidden arches, their half-submerged doors. They tell us that once something happened. Something quiet, something immense. A flood not of water but of mud. A flood that buried not only cities but memories. And perhaps beneath our very feet, Tartaria still sleeps. Civilizations rise and civilizations fall. Rome crumbled, yet we still whisper Rome. The Maya vanished into forests, yet their pyramids still breathe under the sky. Even Atlantis, whether myth or truth, lives on in stories. But Tartaria did not simply fall. It was erased. On maps of the 16th, 17th, even the 18th centuries, Tartaria stretched across half of Asia. Vast, undeniable, written in ink that seemed too bold to fade. And then in the quiet years of the 19th century, it shrank. By the time the 20th century dawned, the name was gone. No debate, no announcement, no farewell, simply silence. This is not how history usually works. Empires are argued over for centuries, their ruins debated, their names remembered. Tartaria, however, dissolved like mist. So we must ask, softly but firmly, who chose to erase it? One answer lies in empire. As Russia expanded eastward, as China secured its frontiers, as Europe mapped and measured the globe, the vast name Tartaria became inconvenient. A name that suggested independence, a civilization not claimed, a shadow too large to fit neatly inside borders. And so the maps changed. Tartaria became Russia. It became Siberia. It became China. Piece by piece, the vast word was divided, replaced, absorbed, until nothing of it remained. It is easier to conquer memory than land. But still, the silence feels too deep to be only empire. Where were the scholars defending Tartaria's existence? Where were the chroniclers lamenting its passing? Where were the debates that always follow when something so immense disappears? Instead, there is only absence, and absence too perfect begins to look like design. Imagine for a moment a quiet decision among rulers, among scholars, among cartographers that the name should vanish. The old maps quietly retired, the new ones printed without it, schools teaching only the new borders, libraries replacing old atlases with updated editions. Within one generation, the word Tartaria would sound strange. Within two, it would be forgotten. The buildings, of course, remained. Domes, spires, arches, windows sinking into the earth. Too solid to erase, too useful to destroy. But even these were renamed. What once might have been Tartarian became Byzantine Revival, or Neoclassical, or Victorian. The same design, the same proportions, scattered across continents now given new labels, quiet disguises, explanations meant to stop questions before they could begin. And so, Tartaria slipped away not with war but with renaming, not with fire but with silence. When I picture this erasure, I feel not anger but a kind of soft unease. History, I realize, is not always a record. Sometimes it is a script, and scripts are written by someone's hand. So who held the pen? Was it empire, reshaping borders for power? Was it scholars, smoothing contradictions to keep the story simple? Or was it something deeper, a hand behind the curtain, deciding what humanity should and should not? Remember, the truth may never be spoken, but the effect remains. For Tartaria was not allowed to die naturally. It was carefully, quietly erased. And that, perhaps, is the most haunting mystery of all. Because if such a vast name can be erased without trace, what else might be gone? Hidden beneath the silence, history often tells us that progress is a straight line. First came fire, then the wheel. Iron followed stone. Steam gave way to electricity. And finally, we arrived at the age of machines. Then the age of silicon. But what if that line is not straight? What if somewhere in the shadows of time, there was a Leapa step so vast it frightened those who came after? This is the whisper that surrounds Tartaria, that perhaps it was not only a land, not only a culture, but a civilization that touched upon knowledge we no longer understand, knowledge that may have been deliberately hidden, forbidden. When you look at the buildings said to belong to Tartaria, they seem more than monuments. They feel like machines. The domes, vast resonant chambers, perfectly symmetrical, as though designed to hold and amplify sound or energy. The spires, metallic, slender, rising like antennae, always ending in sharp points, glinting in the light as though meant to catch something unseen. The foundations, networks of channels, ducts, and chambers that carried water, heat, and air with a sophistication far beyond what the textbooks suggest for their age. Step into such a building, and you may notice the quiet warmth beneath your feet. Heated floors, not crude but carefully balanced through hidden systems. Step into another, and you feel the air move softly, as if guided by unseen hands through channels built into the walls. In some cities, excavations reveal pipes buried deep, linked to reservoirs beneath public halls. These were not crude wells but integrated systems. Water flowing not just for drinking, but for temperature, for circulation, perhaps even some whisper for conducting energy itself. And what of the spires? Historians call them decorative or else lightning rods. But when you see them repeated across continents, in cities oceans apart, built within the same centuries, all bearing the same shape, the thought arises gently. Could they have served another purpose? Could they have drawn energy from the very air? As Nikola Tesla once dreamed, if this were true, Tartaria might have possessed what we now call free energy power, flowing as naturally as air, as abundant as the sky itself. Imagine a world without coal, without oil, without the chains of scarcity. A world where warmth flowed freely in winter, where light hummed from the air itself. A world where empires could not control fuel, for fuel was everywhere. Such a world would be dangerous not to the people, but to those who ruled them. Better, perhaps, to bury it. Better to let mud swallow it. Better to erase the name that carried it. And so the architecture stands before us: domes, spires, arches, silent and beautiful. Not broken, not ruined, but perhaps dormant. Machines that no longer hum, but still carry the form of their purpose. Sometimes, when I stand before such a building, I feel an almost imperceptible vibration. The way sound lingers in the dome, the way the spire points skyward as though waiting for a forgotten signal. It is only imagination, perhaps, but imagination that whispers like memory. Perhaps these were not churches, not palaces, not simple halls. Perhaps they were engines sleeping, disguised as monuments, their true purpose lost beneath centuries of silence. If Tartaria once touched this knowledge, it would explain why its memory was so carefully erased. Because to remember Tartaria would be to remember a truth too vast, too freeing. And so the stones remain, waiting in plain sight, silent, patient. as though they know more than we are allowed to hear. Perhaps, one night in the quiet they will speak again. Civilizations leave their traces not only in ruins, but in echoes that stretch across the world. If Tartaria was ever real, then its footprints may still be beneath our very feet, woven into the fabric of our cities, disguised yet undeniable. Begin in Russia, where its presence feels strongest. Walk through St. Petersburg or Kazan, and the streets whisper with the weight of another time. Onion domes rise like lanterns of stone. Spires pierce the sky and wide squares open with mathematical precision. Some say it is Russian style, others call it Byzantine revival. Yet the repetition, the symmetry, the quiet perfection suggest something more ancient. Move westward and Tartaria does not fade, it multiplies. In Warsaw, domes crown public halls. In Prague, towers rise with strange familiarity. In Vienna, arches and facades carry the same geometry as though carved from the same memory. Paris and London too wear fragments of this style. Always the same echoes. Domes, spires, proportions too exact to be coincidence. Cross the ocean, and the mystery deepens. In San Francisco and Chicago and New York, you find government buildings, train stations, courthouses erected in the 19th century, yet looking as though they were lifted from another age. Wide domes glimmer above, arches stretch impossibly high, and beneath, the same half-buried windows sink quietly into the earth. Historians call it ambition, funded by wealth. But why does the design repeat itself so faithfully, thousands of miles from Russia? Why does a courthouse in America echo the same forms as a cathedral in Kazan, travel further still to the far reaches of Australia, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, cities barely a century old, yet already adorned with monumental domes, symmetrical squares, towers that gleam like echoes of Moscow itself. Penal colonies turned suddenly into grand capitals, their skylines rising not as beginnings, but as inheritances. How could cities so new, so far, produce architecture that mirrors the old world so exactly? Was it fashion, spreading impossibly fast, or was it something older, something that had once spanned the globe, leaving behind a blueprint too strong to erase when you line them up? The domes of Russia, the halls of Europe, the spires of America, the parliaments of Australia, the pattern grows clear. The same language of architecture, repeated across continents within the same narrow centuries. Too precise to be chance, too widespread to be mere imitation. It feels almost as though the world did not build anew in the 18th and 19th centuries, but rebuilt upon something already there. As if Tartaria had once stretched across continents, not through conquest but through design. And perhaps, when the mud came, when the silence followed, the survivors repurposed those structures, gave them new names, new dates, new explanations, but the stone remembers, and the stone still whispers. When I walk through a modern city and pause before such a building, I sometimes feel like a trespasser in another's dream. The square before me, the dome above, the spire pointing skyward, it feels less like human choice, more like inheritance. A pattern not created, but obeyed. Perhaps Tartaria was not a nation, but a network. Not an empire of war, but an empire of design. A civilization whose architecture carried a shared code across the world. And though its name was erased, though its story was silenced, its footprints remain. Domes shining in the sunlight, spires whispering to the sky, windows half buried in earth, signs waiting for us to notice. And once you see them, you cannot unsee them. They are everywhere. Wars are usually fought with swords, with fire, with armies that clash beneath the sky. But the most enduring war, the one that leaves no smoke, no scars on the earth, is the war for memory. When Tartaria disappeared from maps, there was no battle to mark its end. No treaty to announce its fall. Its name simply dissolved quietly, as though someone had pressed a hand against history and hushed it into silence. The first weapon in this war was absence. Children grew up never hearing the word. Scholars no longer debated its borders. Maps, one by one, stopped carrying its ink. With each passing generation, the silence grew deeper. By the third generation, Tartaria was not forgotten, it was unthinkable. The second weapon was renaming. The buildings remained, of course. Domes, spires, arches that stretched toward the sky. But they were given new names, new labels. A cathedral became Byzantine revival. A courthouse became Victorian. A parliament house in Australia became colonial. Each label a disguise, meant to fold the unfamiliar into the familiar, to turn questions into acceptance. The third weapon was fear. Whispers of Tartaria survived in myths but twisted into shadows. The Tatars became monsters, Gog and Magog, riders of apocalypse. The very word Tartarus, the abyss of punishment, clung to their name. And so memory itself became frightening. Curiosity turned into dread. Who would dare seek the truth of a land tied to demons? And so, little by little, the story was rewritten. The vast name that once covered half the maps of the world became a ghost. Its stones repainted. Its echoes softened. Its memory caged. Humanity grew smaller, believing itself always fragmented, always struggling upward from darkness, always dependent on rulers to guide its fragile steps. But if Tartaria was real, then its memory tells another story. A story of connection, perhaps even of a shared blueprint across continents. A story of abundance, not scarcity. A story of a world larger, freer, more mysterious than we are taught to believe. To erase such a story is not only to erase the past, it is to shape the present, to decide what we are allowed to imagine and what must remain hidden. When I look at the half-buried windows, I see not just stone. I see symbols, doors bricked up not only in walls but in our minds, windows sealed, not only against light but against memory. And I wonder what else has been erased if Tartaria could vanish so completely. What prevents other truths from being erased as well? The thought drifts like a whisper in the dark. Perhaps the greatest flood was not of mud, but of silence. A flood that buried not only cities, but the very imagination of what humanity might once have been. And in that silence, the war for memory was won. When a civilization is erased, it does not vanish completely. It lingers like a faint melody that drifts on long after the instruments have fallen silent. If Tartaria truly existed, then perhaps its people did not disappear. Perhaps they survived hidden in plain sight, scattered across lands, or remembered only in fragments of story. And it is in these fragments, in myths and legends, that Tartaria may still breathe. In Europe, whispers of Gog and Magog lived on. The Bible spoke of nations sealed behind walls of iron, destined to break free in the last days. When Mongol armies thundered into Europe, many believed the prophecy fulfilled. The riders were not men but monsters, the release of Gog and Magog themselves. Yet beneath the fear, perhaps there was memory and echo of people once powerful, now recast as demons so they could be feared, not remembered. In Persia and Arabia, chroniclers described Tatars with awe as much as terror. They spoke not only of raids but of markets, caravans stretching across the steppes, cities alive with trade. Yet over time the accounts blurred. Discipline became endurance beyond human measure. Weapons gleamed with unnatural sharpness. Their strength seemed not of this world. Was this exaggeration? Or was it memory, wrapped in myth because truth could no longer be spoken plainly? In Siberia, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, folk tales whisper of golden cities swallowed by the earth. Entire tribes vanishing overnight. Hunters stumbling on domes half buried in tundra. Walls that rang like hollow bells when struck. Campfire stories perhaps. Or perhaps the last breath of memory, preserved in the only way it could survive, through legend. Some suggest that survivors of Tartaria were absorbed into the rising powers of the world. Some may have become nobility, their knowledge hidden behind silence. Others wandered, scattered, their wisdom diluted into guilds and secret societies. Could echoes of Tartaria live on in the mysteries of Freemasons, Rosicrucians, or other keepers of hidden knowledge? And if so, what bargains did they make to survive? Did they bury their own past so they could live in the new world that erased them? When I hear these stories, I do not hear fantasy. I hear trauma. I hear the voices of survivors who could not speak directly, who wrapped their truths in monsters, in miracles, in walls of myth. Myths are often broken mirrors. Each shard reflects something real but distorted, fragmented, softened by time and fear. Perhaps this is Tartaria's rebellion, that even when its name was erased, its memory could not be completely silenced. Instead, it lived on in tales of giants and whispers of buried kingdoms, and the strange familiarity of buildings that seemed too old, too perfect, too alike. And yet, there is a darker side. For when memory is twisted, it can become curse. Survivors remembered not as ancestors but as devils, their architecture renamed, their technologies denied, their very identity turned to shadow. That may have been the final cruelty, not only to erase Tartaria, but to make remembrance itself frightening. so that even when its name is spoken, we recoil rather than recognize. Still, the myths endure. They travel like dreams across generations, waiting for someone who dares to listen. And if you close your eyes and let the whispers wash over you, perhaps you will hear not monsters, but people, not legends, but memories, not fantasy, but fragments of a truth too fragile to survive in any other way. Because myths, after all, are truths wearing masks. Civilizations fade, or so we are told. But perhaps they do not truly die. Perhaps they wait, quiet as stone, patient as the earth itself. If Tartaria was once real, then its silence may not be the end of its story. It may only be the pause between chapters. Today, more than ever, the name has begun to stir again. On old maps rediscovered in libraries, the word Tartaria spreads quietly across parchment once more. In archives of photographs, people notice the windows half buried beneath city streets. On forums and late-night conversations, whispers return, as if the memory itself resists being forgotten. It feels almost alive, this word, Tartaria, as though every time it is spoken, the silence cracks a little, and something stirs in the shadows of history. Look at our cities, the ones we call modern. Moscow, St. Petersburg, Warsaw, Chicago, Melbourne. Their cores are not new. Their cores are Tartarian. The domes and spires still rise, the arches still open wide. The streets still radiate from squares with a strange, measured symmetry. Are they ruins? Or are they something more? What if they are not dead monuments, but sleeping engines, machines disguised as stone, waiting for a spark to awaken them? It is a thought both delicate and unsettling, that perhaps we do not live after Tartaria, but within it, surrounded by its architecture, its designs, its silent presence woven into the very places we call our own. Some say Tartaria will return not through stones rising from mud, but through memory. That one day, when enough eyes notice the buried windows, when enough voices whisper the forgotten name, the silence will break, and the story will re-emerge. Others dream of something more dramatic, another shift, another flood, another unraveling of the ground beneath us. And when the soil recedes, the forgotten levels of our cities will stand revealed, like ghosts shaking off their blankets of earth. But perhaps the return of Tartaria is neither disaster nor miracle. Perhaps it is simply awakening, a slow recognition that the past is larger than we were told, that history is not a narrow line but a circle, and in that circle, what was erased can always return. When I walk beneath a great dome, when I hear the way sound echoes in its chamber, I sometimes imagine it humming softly, waiting to be switched on. When I see a spire gleaming in sunlight, I imagine it not as ornament but as conductor, quietly pointing toward a sky still full of energy. These are only imaginings, of course, and yet they feel like memory. The return of Tartaria, if it comes, may not be gentle. It may shake our understanding of everything we believe about history. It may remind us that what was buried can rise again, but for now it lingers quietly, like a dream just before waking, waiting in the silence of stones, waiting in the half-buried windows, waiting in the whisper of a name once written across half the world. Tartaria, not gone, not finished, only waiting. History is fragile. It is not carved in stone, though we sometimes imagine it is. It is ink on paper. It is words on lips. It is whispers passed from one generation to the next. And whispers can be silenced. Tartaria may have been a civilization. It may have been a myth. Perhaps it was both. But whatever it was, what matters now is not only proof, not only ruins, not even maps. What matters is the choice, because history is not just what happened. It is what we allow ourselves to remember. We stand always at a crossroads. On one side lies the safe story, the linear march of time, the steady climb of civilization from darkness into light, the script written neatly in books and taught in schools. On the other side lies the forbidden memory of a world larger than we were told, of a name erased, of technologies hidden, of myths that may still carry truth. Which path do we choose? If we choose silence, Tartaria fades again. The domes remain as decorations, the spires as ornaments, the buried windows as curiosities without questions. Life moves on. The erasers win again. But if we choose memory, even uncertain, even fragile, then Tartaria never truly dies. It lives in the stones, in the myths, in the quiet unease we feel when we walk past an old building that seems too perfect, too mysterious, too out of place. When I close my eyes, I see those bricked-up windows. They are not only architecture, they are symbols. They are questions sealed in stone, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to ask. And so, the choice is ours. Do we leave them buried and let the silence cradle us back into forgetfulness, or do we pause, look closer, and whisper the forbidden name once more? Because what is buried can rise again, and what is erased can always be remembered if we dare. Tartaria may never return in the way we imagine, but in the end it does not need to. For the act of remembering, of simply asking the question, may already be enough. And so we drift quietly, between silence and memory, between the world we are told and the world that waits beneath it. The choice belongs not to history but to us.